All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep on a question that might seem, well, a little out there at first.
Out there how?
Like, what happens when you put Buddha and Karl Marx, yeah, those guys, in the same room?
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this.
We're going to be exploring an essay that tackles this head on.
Sounds intriguing.
It was written by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, brilliant Indian scholar.
Ambedkar, yeah, he was deeply concerned with inequality, especially the caste system in India,
Right, and his search for solutions led him to some unexpected places.
like comparing Buddha and Marx.
Exactly.
That's pretty bold considering they lived centuries apart.
Okay, so picture this. 1956, Buddhist conference in Nepal, Ambedkar's giving a speech.
This speech later became the essay we're diving into.
Yep. And get this, researchers found 3 different handwritten versions of it. Talk about dedication.
Wow, he really wrestled with these ideas.
So in this deep dive, our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to figure out Ambedkar's argument. Why did he think Buddhism might be a better path to equality, especially for India, compared to Marxism?
To understand that, we got to start with the basics.
Lay it on us.
Ambedkar breaks down the core philosophies of both Buddha and Marx, and he goes beyond the surface level.
Yeah, when he talks about Buddha, it's not just about peace and love, although that's definitely in there.
It's much more comprehensive.
It's like Buddha created a whole system.
For personal and societal transformation.
Everything from how you act to, get this, economic structures.
It's the big picture stuff.
And with Marx, Ambedkar explains this thing called scientific socialism.
Right.
Which basically says capitalism is going to self-destruct.
Because of, like, built-in flaws.
Exactly. And then we'll have a classless society, but things haven't quite gone according to plan, have they?
History's messy like that.
Totally. So Ambedkar's acknowledging that Marx's ideas were powerful, but in the real world, it's been complicated, for sure. But here's where it gets interesting. Ambedkar finds some common ground between Buddha and Marx.
Oh, really? Like what?
You ready for this? They both saw class struggle as a huge problem in society.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
And get this, they both thought abolishing private property could reduce inequality.
Wow, okay, that's pretty relevant to us today, right? All the talk about wealth gaps and stuff.
Absolutely, and Ambedkar backs this up with Buddhist scriptures.
He even mentions this thing called the Bhikshu Sang,
Which is...
the Buddhist monastic order. And they had these really strict rules about possessions.
Like what?
A monk could only have, like, robes, a bowl for food, a needle and thread, a razor, and a water strainer. That's it.
Wow, minimalist monks.
Everything else was shared. The idea was to reduce attachment to material things.
So like communal living.
In a way, yeah, pretty radical,
Yeah.
even compared to some of Marx's ideas.
So we're seeing these unexpected connections between Buddha and Marx.
Totally, but the real question is, how did they think we should achieve equality? That's where they really split.
And that's what we'll be diving into next. Okay, so we were just talking about how Buddha and Karl Marx both thought class struggle was a bad thing.
Right, a societal ill.
But they had very different ideas about how to fix it.
And remember, Ambedkar's not just comparing philosophies for fun.
He's trying to find solutions for real-world problems.
Especially in India, with the caste system.
He wants to know what path is actually going to lead to a just and equal society.
So it's not just about wanting equality, it's about how you get there.
The how is important.
Exactly. And on the surface, you've got Buddha, the guy all about peace and nonviolence.
Right, like the Panchasila, the Eightfold Path.
All those classic Buddhist teachings.
Yeah.
But Ambedkar points out, those aren't just nice ideas.
They're like instructions for how to live ethically.
Exactly, like the idea of right livelihood.
Which is...
Choosing work that doesn't harm or exploit others.
Makes sense.
It's all about reducing suffering, a core Buddhist principle.
No, it's about personal responsibility, but also recognizing that our actions affect everyone.
Yes. Our actions have ripple effects.
And that's where we see a big difference from Marx.
Whose focus was more on changing the system itself.
Often through revolution.
Which, historically speaking, hasn't always been peaceful.
Yeah, revolutions can get messy.
Definitely. But Ambedkar brings up a really interesting point here.
Oh.
Even Buddha doesn't totally rule out violence.
Really?
If it's for truth and justice.
That's a pretty tricky phrase, though. Who gets to decide what's true and just enough to justify violence?
That's the million-dollar question.
And Ambedkar grapples with it, too.
He knows that just because something could have good results doesn't mean any tactic is okay.
So he's drawing a line, but it's a blurry one.
Exactly. And Ambedkar was concerned about the potential for violence in some Marxist ideas.
Especially after seeing what happened in some communist countries.
Right. He was writing in the 1950s, so Stalinism and authoritarian regimes were fresh in his mind.
He saw how the pursuit of a classless society could lead to new forms of oppression.
Which worried him. The means can't justify the ends.
So he saw a danger there, even if the goal was good.
And he contrasts that with the Buddhist path, which is more about changing hearts and minds.
Instead of forcing change through violence.
Right.
But can individual change really create big social change? Don't we need to change the systems too?
That's a great question, and Ambedkar addresses it.
What does he say?
He says Buddhism isn't just about personal enlightenment.
There's more to it.
It also has a framework for how society should be organized, how we should govern ourselves to promote fairness and justice.
So it's not one or the other, it's both.
Exactly. Both personal and systemic transformation are necessary for lasting change.
They work together.
And that brings us to his conclusion.
The moment of truth. What's Ambedkar's verdict?
He says that for India, Buddhism, with its focus on both individual enlightenment and social reform, is a better fit than Marxism, especially considering how some Marxist regimes turned out.
He thinks Buddhism is a better match for India's values and traditions.
Right.
But he doesn't completely dismiss Marx, does he?
No, not at all.
He still sees value in Marx's critique of capitalism.
Definitely. He agrees that systemic inequality needs to be addressed. But he sees problems with Marx's solutions.
Like the potential for violence and authoritarianism.
Exactly.
So Ambedkar thinks the Buddhist path, with its emphasis on ethical behavior, compassion, and wisdom, is a more sustainable way to reach equality.
Yes.
But what does all this have to do with us? We don't live in India, and most of us aren't Buddhist.
That's where it gets really interesting. It's about the big ideas, the questions Ambedkar raises. They go way beyond just India or Buddhism.
So it's relevant to all of us.
Totally. It gets us thinking about how we approach social change, any kind of social change, whatever cause you're passionate about.
So no matter what we're fighting for, this applies.
Think of it this way. Ambedkar's comparison shows us there's not just one way to make a more just world, and it's never easy.
It's definitely not black and white.
Right. He highlights this tension between like top-down change, like a revolution.
Versus bottom-up, like people changing their own behavior.
Exactly. So can we create lasting change just through individual actions?
Or do we need to focus on changing laws and systems?
Those are the big questions.
And then there's the whole violence thing.
Right. Like we talked about, even Buddha had to grapple with the idea of violence for a good cause.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought.
Hit me with it.
If even Buddha, the embodiment of peace, considered violence sometimes, it tells us that even the best movements can get caught in those morally gray areas.
Even if their hearts are in the right place.
Exactly. Good intentions aren't a guarantee.
It's easy to think, I'm fighting for a good cause, so anything goes.
But Ambedkar pushes us to think deeper than that.
To be more critical, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
To really look at our methods and ask, do they actually match the values we're fighting for?
That's a good point, and it reminds me of something Ambedkar said about the means and the ends.
Oh yeah, he was big on that.
Like, we can't just focus on the goal.
You got to pay attention to how we get there.
And that matters for all of us, no matter what side of the political spectrum we're on.
Absolutely. It's about holding ourselves to a higher standard, realizing that the path to a better world is going to have twists and turns.
So we may not get all the answers from Ambedkar, but he sure gives us a lot to think about.
And sometimes those questions are more important than easy answers.
They keep us curious, keep us learning.
Keep the conversation going, even when it's hard.
If anyone wants to explore Ambedkar's ideas further, you can find a link to his essay in the show notes.
It's a challenging read, but it'll get you thinking.
And that's what the deep dive is all about. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.